Hello, I'm Kellen. On my dad's birthday, he told me not to call myself his son because I didn't look right standing next to my sister's perfect boyfriend. What none of them knew was that I'd spent 2 years quietly paying their bills, nearly $10,000 in all, while they still called me the family shame. And when everything in that house started shutting down, the one man they were trying so hard to impress looked at me and said, "Hey, boss, before we get into it, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is where you are." I read every comment. That morning started like any other, with a cup of coffee in my hand and a silence I thought I understood. I was standing by the window with a cup of coffee in my hand when the day really began. It wasn't sunrise or anything dramatic, just that quiet stretch of morning where everything feels paused. The sky over Tacoma was the same dull gray it usually was this time of year. No rain yet, just that heavy cloud cover that made everything look a little flatter than it should. I had gotten used to that kind of quiet, not the peaceful kind people talk about. This was different. It was the kind that settled in your chest and stayed there. Predictable, manageable, like a routine you didn't question anymore. I took a slow sip. The coffee was still warm. That mattered. It meant I hadn't been standing there too long, lost in thought again. For a moment, everything felt steady. Same view, same cup, same silence. Then I reached for my phone. It wasn't a big decision, just something I did without overthinking it. My dad's birthday was coming up, and like every year, I planned to go home. I had already arranged time off, booked everything. It was simple. I hit call. He picked up on the second ring. "Yeah?" His voice wasn't wrong, just off, like something had already been decided before I even spoke. "Hey, Dad, it's me." A short pause. "I figured," he said. I gave a small breath through my nose, more habit than reaction. "I was just calling to let you know. I'll be coming in a couple days early this year. Thought I'd help out before your birthday. Pick up anything you need. Get things ready." That was how it always went. I showed up early, helped set things up, took care of the small stuff so no one had to think about it. There was another pause. Longer this time. I shifted the cup slightly in my hand, the heat pressing against my fingers. "You don't have to do that," he said finally. I glanced toward the window again, watching a car pass slowly down the street. "It's fine," I replied. "I've got time. It's not a big deal." He didn't respond right away. Something in that silence lingered. Not awkward, not exactly, just held. Then he exhaled, like he was choosing his next words carefully. "Jody's bringing her boyfriend this time." There it was. I nodded to myself, even though he couldn't see it. "Yeah? That's good," I said. "Haven't met him yet. My dad paused again. "He's a good kid." I leaned my shoulder lightly against the wall. "That's great," I said. "What does he do?" "He's in management," my dad replied. His tone shifted slightly. Not louder, just firmer. "Carries himself well, knows how to talk to people. You know what I mean." I didn't answer right away. I just listened. "He's the kind of person people take seriously," he added. My fingers tightened around the cup without me meaning to. The warmth had started to fade, but I didn't move to refill it. "That's good for her," I said after a moment. "Yeah," he replied. "It is." Another pause followed. This one didn't feel neutral anymore. It felt like something was being measured. "And you," he continued almost casually, "you're still doing that tech thing, right?" I let out a quiet breath. "Yeah, still working at the same place." "Right," a short beat. "Well, that was it. Just, well, not a question, not interest, just something to move past." I looked down at the surface of my coffee. A thin layer had already started to cool. For a second, I considered explaining, clarifying, saying what I actually did, what I had built, what my days really looked like. But I didn't. I never really did. Instead, I just said, "Yeah." He shifted again on the other end of the line. "Like I said," he went on, "Jody's boyfriend. He presents himself well. People notice that." There was no direct comparison, None stated out loud, but it was there, clear enough. I adjusted my grip on the cup again, feeling the ceramic press into my palm. Maybe I was reading into it. Maybe he was just proud of her. That's what I told myself. That's what I always told myself. Have you ever had a conversation where nothing was said directly, but you still felt smaller by the end of it? I kept my tone steady. Sounds like she's doing well, I said. She is, he replied quickly. And that was the part that landed. Not what he said, how easily it came, how certain. The silence that followed didn't feel empty anymore. It felt full of everything neither of us was saying. I looked back out the window, same street, same slow-moving morning. But something had shifted. The quiet wasn't neutral now. It had weight. The coffee in my hand had gone lukewarm, but I hadn't taken another sip. I'll let you know when I get in, I said after a moment. Yeah, he replied. Do that. The call ended without anything settling. No argument, no clarity. Just a conversation that left something behind. I stood there a little longer, phone in one hand, cup in the other. Then I set the phone down. The room was quiet again, but not the same quiet as before. I stared out at the gray sky, trying to place exactly what had changed. I couldn't. Not yet. Then he said something I couldn't pretend I didn't hear. What came next did not sound like anger. That would have been easier to understand. It sounded measured, clean, like he had already decided how far he was willing to go and was not the least bit troubled by it. If you still plan on coming, my father said, then don't call me your son. The words did not hit all at once. They landed in pieces. My hand tightened around the phone. The cup in my other hand tipped just enough for a drop of coffee to touch my finger. I felt the warmth, but barely. I did not set anything down. I did not interrupt him. I just stood there, staring past the window like the street outside might somehow make sense of what I had just heard. For a second, I honestly thought I had missed part of the sentence. Maybe he meant something else. Maybe it came out wrong. People say ugly things when they are flustered. People step on their own meaning all the time. But my father was not flustered. He was clear. I heard myself speak, though my voice sounded farther away than it should have. What did you just say? There was no apology on the other end, no backtracking, no awkward little laugh to soften it. Instead, he said, you showing up would embarrass this family. That was the moment it settled in, not because the sentence was harsher than the first one. In some ways, it was simpler, smaller, but it carried the same message without any room left to misread it. He did not want me there. Not because of timing, not because the house would be crowded, not because they were trying to keep things easy. He did not want me there because somehow I lowered the room. I wish I could tell you I snapped back with something sharp, something clean and memorable. I did not. I did what I had done most of my life when it came to my family. I went quiet. Not polite quiet. Not thoughtful quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when something inside you takes one step back and closes a door. I could still hear him breathing faintly through the phone. I could hear a cabinet shut somewhere on his end. Normal sounds, household sounds. That might have been the strangest part. The world had not changed for him at all. For me, it had shifted on its axis. I lowered the phone slowly. I could not have told you whether I ended the call or he did. By then, it hardly mattered. The apartment looked exactly the same as it had 2 minutes earlier. Same pale light, same kitchen counter, same chair by the window. But the place felt unfamiliar now, as if I had somehow become a visitor in my own life. I looked down at the coffee in my hand. It had already lost its heat. I took a sip anyway. Flat, bitter. Not terrible, just empty. That was the closest thing I had to a feeling in that moment. Have you ever heard something so plain, so direct, that it did not even hurt right away? It just hollowed out the space where your reaction should have been. I stood there longer than made sense. The phone was still in my hand. My shoulder had gone stiff. I could feel my jaw set, but not because I was angry. Not yet. Anger has heat to it. This was colder than that. My mind started pulling at old moments without fully opening them. The way my father used to speak about Jody in full paragraphs and about me in half sentences. The way my mother would say, Kellen's doing fine, and leave it there, as if being fine was the whole story of a person. The way I had learned, without anyone ever saying it directly, that my best role in that family was to make things easier and ask for nothing in return. I had never put that thought into words before. Maybe because once you do, you have to decide what to do with it. I finally set the cup on the table beside the couch. I did not finish it. I sat down, leaned forward, and let my elbows rest on my knees. The phone stayed in my hand, dark now, reflecting a faint blur of the room. I was not planning anything. I was not trying to calm down. I was just sitting in the space that sentence had made. It is strange how quickly one conversation can reorder the years behind it. Not erase them, not explain them completely. Just rearrange them enough that you start seeing the pattern instead of the separate pieces. I did not feel rage. That would come later. What I felt then was quieter and in some ways more final. A kind of distance beginning to take shape. The first inch of ground between who I thought I was in that family and what they had apparently decided I was worth. I sat there with that thought longer than I want to admit, and for the first time a question came to me that I had never really allowed myself to ask. Not out loud, not cleanly, not even in one complete sentence, but it was there. If this was how little I meant once I stopped fitting the picture, then what exactly had I been doing for them all this time? So I opened my banking app and started scrolling. I did not open the app like a man hunting for proof. It felt more like checking a locked door after hearing a noise downstairs. You already know something is off. You just need to see it with your own eyes. The screen lit up in my hand. I typed in my password, waited for the account summary to load, and tapped into the payment history. For half a second, my thumb hovered there. Then I dragged the screen upward. Electric bill, water bill, internet, again and again. Month after month, the same 3 names kept showing up, lined up in neat rows with dates beside them. Some months were a little higher, some were lower, but the pattern stayed steady. Nothing dramatic, nothing messy, just regular payments made on time in amounts small enough that I had stopped treating them like decisions. I leaned forward, forearms on my knees, the phone cradled in both hands now. The coffee I'd set aside sat untouched on the table. A faint ring of condensation had formed beneath the mug. I noticed it without really looking. What struck me first was not the money, it was the rhythm of it. Every few weeks there I was, covering one more bill, keeping one more thing running. Quietly, dependably, like maintenance, like background noise. Like I had folded myself into their house without ever stepping inside it. I was not forced. That part matters. Nobody held a threat over me. Nobody cornered me with a signed agreement. My mother had called that first time in a soft voice, talking about how expensive everything had gotten. She had said it would only be for a little while, just until things settled down, just until your father got caught up, just until we had room to breathe, and I had said yes. At the time, it felt reasonable, decent even. Parents get older, costs rise, families help each other. That is how most people see it, and to be honest, that is how I saw it too. But as I kept scrolling, one thought kept pressing harder against the rest. Why had I never stopped to ask when for a little while became normal? The screen blurred for a moment, not because my eyes were wet, but because my mind had drifted somewhere older. I thought about family pictures first. Not the big occasions even. Just regular photos people took without thinking much about them. Backyard cookouts, Christmas mornings, a graduation party for Jody when she finished community college. In nearly every one of those pictures, she stood square in the middle, smiling like the day had been built around her. My parents leaned toward her without meaning to. I stood slightly off to one side, close enough to count, far enough to miss. Once years ago, my aunt mailed us a copy of a family photo after Thanksgiving. Mine had a crease right through my shoulder because it had been folded wrong in the envelope. Jody laughed and said, "Well, I guess that fits." Everybody smiled. Nobody corrected her. At Christmas, her gifts were opened first because she always had a story attached to them. Something she wanted, something she had hinted at, something my mother was excited to explain. Mine usually sat near the end of the pile. My father would hand it over with a quick, "Here, this one's yours." Not cruel, not harsh, just efficient, as if my part of the day took less time to account for. At school events, it was the same. Jody was introduced, expanded on, defended before anyone asked questions. If people asked about me, my mother would say, "Kellen's doing fine." That was the whole summary. I was fine the way a waiting room chair is fine. Functional, quiet, easy to overlook. No one pushed me out of the frame. That would have been easier to name. I just learned, little by little, that stepping aside kept things smooth. If I took up less room, nobody got tense. If I handled my own problems, nobody had to make space for them. If I stayed useful and uncomplicated, I could at least belong somewhere near the edge. Did you ever realize you were invisible not because anyone ordered you there, but because you got so used to making yourself smaller that you stopped noticing it? I blinked and looked back down at my phone. The payment history was still there, still glowing in the same quiet rows. Nothing on that screen cared how I felt about it. That was almost comforting. Numbers did not flatter. They did not downplay. They did not say one child carried herself well, while another one embarrassed the family. They just stayed put. I scrolled further. Slower now. I was not trying to build a case against them. That is the honest truth. At least not yet. What I wanted more than anything was to understand when I had crossed from helping into something else. Something unnamed. Something expected. My breathing had settled. My hands were steady. If anyone had seen me then, they might have thought I was checking a routine statement before heading to work. But something inside me was starting to line up. Not emotion. Not exactly. Recognition. I stopped scrolling before I reached the bottom. Not because I was finished. Because I had already seen enough to ask the question I should have asked a long time ago. Not what had they done. Not even what did they owe me. Something simpler, harder. Why had I kept doing this without ever asking what role I had been assigned in that family? And whether I had chosen it or just grown into it because nobody objected. I stared at the screen a moment longer, then moved my thumb down once more. Then I reached the total, and everything went quiet in a different way. I dragged my thumb down one more time and reached the bottom of the list. There it was, a total. $9,842.17. I did not sit up straighter. I did not curse under my breath. I did not feel that dramatic jolt people talk about when something finally becomes real. I just looked at it. The amount itself was not what hit me first. It was how exact it was. Not rounded, not vague, precise down to the cent. A quiet little ledger of 2 years of saying yes without ever naming what those yeses were costing me. I read it again. $9,842.17. Then I said it once, softly, just to hear how it sounded in the room. It did not sound like money. It sounded like time. It sounded like winter utility bills and quick phone calls from my mother. It sounded like just this month and we're a little short, and your father's been under a lot of stress. It sounded like me saying, "Sure, I can cover that," before I even thought about whether I should. That was the part that sat with me. I had never sent that money to earn praise. I was not trying to buy a place at the table. I was not keeping score in some secret little notebook, waiting for the day I could throw it back in their faces. That would have at least been simpler. What I did was worse in a way. I assumed being dependable would mean something on its own. I assumed that if I kept showing up quietly, handling what needed to be handled, not making scenes, not asking for credit, eventually that would count for something deeper than convenience. And there I was, still hearing my father's voice in my head, telling me that my presence would embarrass the family. That disconnect was so sharp it almost became clean. If you gave this much, asked for nothing, and still ended up treated like a problem to be managed, would you call that love? I leaned back against the couch, the phone loose in my hand now. The room had grown brighter as the morning moved toward noon, but none of that light warmed anything. It only made the apartment look more still, more exposed. I started connecting things I had spent years keeping separate. Every transfer, every bill, every time I let my mother glide past the subject of Jody helping out. Every time I heard some version of your sister's got a lot on her plate, or she's doing what she can, even when I knew that meant nothing at all. Every time I accepted a vague explanation because pushing for the truth would have made me the difficult one. I had not been supporting them. Not really. I had been replacing something. Responsibility, maybe. Structure. A sense of order no one else wanted to carry. And the stranger truth was this. The more reliable I became, the easier it was for them not to see me at all. I was not the son they were proud to talk about. I was the one who kept the lights on, the water running, the internet connected, the invisible part of the house that only mattered when it stopped working. That realization did not come in with heat. It settled in quietly, like dust after something heavy falls in the next room. I looked over at the coffee I had poured earlier. It was still sitting there on the table, dark and untouched now, the surface flat and lifeless. Usually I would have picked it up without thinking, reheated it, finished it anyway. I did not. Not because I forgot it was there. Because I did not want it. That small choice felt bigger than it should have. I looked back at the total one last time. Then I locked the phone and let it rest against my palm. Nothing outside had changed. A car moved through the street below. Somewhere down the hall, a neighbor shut a door. Pipes thudded in the wall. Life going on, same as always, but inside me something had shifted its weight. Not loudly, not all at once. Just enough that I knew I would not slide back into the same place as easily as I had before. I sat there a while longer, not making any grand decision, not promising myself anything dramatic. I did not need a speech. I did not need a plan written out in neat little steps. I only knew one thing. The next time my mother's name lit up my phone, I was not going to answer the way I used to. A few evenings passed before her name showed up again. By then, the first shock had settled into something steadier. I still went to work. I still answered emails. I still sat through meetings and made decisions that mattered. From the outside, nothing about my life looked disrupted. But once I got home and the apartment went quiet, I could feel the difference. It was there in the pauses, in what I no longer rushed to excuse. That evening, the light had already started to thin by the time I set my keys on the kitchen counter. The sky outside the window had gone from gray to that washed-out blue that never quite becomes evening all at once. I loosened my tie, rolled my sleeves up, and stood there for a moment, deciding whether I wanted coffee or just silence. My phone lit up first. Mom. Same contact photo, same soft little chime, same person who always managed to sound gentle, even when she was asking for something she had no right to expect. I looked at the screen until it almost stopped ringing. Then I answered. "Hi, sweetheart," she said, warm as ever. "Did I catch you at a bad time?" "No," I said. "I just got in." "Well," a tiny pause. "I won't keep you." That was always how it started. A little courtesy before the real point. I waited. "The internet bill came in again," she said. "Can you take care of it?" That was it. No mention of my father. No mention of what he had said. No, "How are you doing?" Not even a clumsy attempt to pretend the last conversation had gone any other way. Just the bill. I leaned one hand against the counter and stared at the dark window over the sink. My reflection looked back at me, faint and flat in the glass. "You still there?" she asked. "I'm here." "I just didn't want it to slip by," she said. "You know how these things are." I did know. I knew the tone, the pacing, the assumption hidden beneath the softness. She was not asking whether I could help. She was speaking from a place where helping had already been decided. My only role was to complete the task and keep everyone comfortable. On the counter beside me sat the coffee maker. I had not even turned it on yet. The mug was still upside down on the drying mat where I had left it that morning. For a brief second, I almost said yes. Not because she deserved it, because saying yes would have made the evening easier. It would have returned everything to its old shape. No confrontation, no hard line, no need to sit with what had happened. I could have handled it in less than a minute. Open the app, pay the bill, move on, That old reflex was still in me. Fix it, smooth it over, don't make this bigger than it has to be. My thumb had already unlocked my phone before I fully realized what I was doing. Then something in me stopped. Not anger, not pride, memory. Her voice now, calm and practical. My father's voice from that morning, colder than I had ever heard it. Don't call me your son. That sentence did more than hurt me. It clarified something. It stripped the polite covering off a pattern I had been living inside for years. My mother was still on the line. Kellen? I pulled the phone away from my ear and ended the call without another word. I did not slam it down. I did not toss it across the room. I just set it on the counter, screen facing up, and opened my banking app. Then I went where I should have gone a long time ago. Automatic payments. There they were, laid out in neat, orderly rows. Electric, water, internet. Each one scheduled, each one reliable. Each one built around the idea that I would continue being the part of their life nobody needed to acknowledge as long as it worked. I tapped the first one. The screen opened. My finger paused over the settings. I could still back out. I could still leave everything exactly the way it was. Instead, I disabled it. No surge of adrenaline, no satisfaction. Just one clean action, then the second, then the third. I moved through them slowly, carefully, almost the way you take ornaments off a shelf before packing up a room you know you will not be living in again. By the time I was done, the system that had quietly tied me to their house for 2 years was gone. Not loudly, not dramatically, just removed. My phone buzzed almost at once. A text from my mother. Can you call me back? I looked at it and did nothing. A minute later, another message. Did we get cut off? Still, I did not answer. For the first time, my silence was not confusion. It was not hesitation. It was not me waiting for the right words. It was a decision. I finally reached for the mug, turned it upright, and poured a fresh cup of coffee. The steam rose in a thin ribbon. I stood by the counter and took one sip. It was hot, clean, bitter in the usual way. It did not comfort me. What I felt was farther than comfort. It was distance. By the next morning, the calls started coming in, and this time they didn't sound patient. The next morning came in gray again, the kind of sky that never really wakes up. I was halfway through making coffee when my phone started vibrating across the counter. Dad. I let it ring. Not to prove anything, not to punish him. I just stood there with one hand on the cabinet door and listened to that sound move through the kitchen. It stopped. Then, almost immediately, started again. This time I picked up. He did not bother with hello. The power company called, he said. This month's bill hasn't been paid. What's going on? His voice had changed. A few days earlier, he had sounded controlled, almost formal in the way he cut me down. This was different, sharper, less polished, the kind of tone people use when they think a problem should already be fixed. I did not answer right away. He kept talking. Your mother said the internet payment never went through either. Did something happen with your account? There it was. Not, did you stop paying? Not, are you all right? Not even, we need to talk about what I said. Just the assumption that this had to be an error, a glitch, a mix-up, something I would correct as soon as it was pointed out. That difference sat heavy with me. He was not treating this like a decision. He was treating it like a clerical mistake. I moved the phone a few inches from my ear, not because I was overwhelmed, but because I needed space to hear my own thoughts clearly. The coffee machine clicked behind me. Fresh coffee dripped into the pot. The smell filled the room. The routine was still there, right where it always was. But I was not stepping into it the same way. My father kept going, his irritation building one notch at a time. I don't know what kind of misunderstanding this is, but it needs to be handled. We can't have services getting interrupted over something careless. Careless. That word almost made me laugh, but it did not reach my face. This was the part that hurt more than the call itself. Not his tone, the choice in front of me. If I explained, I opened the whole thing back up. He would argue, he would minimize. He would tell me not to make this bigger than it needed to be. Somewhere in the middle of that, I would be pulled right back into the role I had finally stepped out of. If I fixed it, everything reset. The same pattern, the same silence, the same understanding that I could be insulted one day and useful the next. If I refused, then I became exactly who they would say I was. Ungrateful, difficult, cold. The son who turned his back on family. That is the kind of trap people do not talk about enough. Sometimes there is no clean option, no version where you walk away and still look kind to everyone watching. Most people go back in moments like that, not because they are weak, because they are tired, because peace can look a lot like surrender when you have been carrying tension for too long. At what point does keeping the peace start costing you more than the conflict ever would? I poured my coffee and wrapped my hand around the mug, letting the heat settle into my palm. My father was still waiting. I did not argue. I did not list what I had paid. I did not bring up his birthday call. I did not remind him what he had said to me, word for word, though I could have. Instead, I said, very evenly, I think you'll need to handle that. Silence. Not a dropped call silence. The kind where a person on the other end is trying to decide whether he heard you correctly. Then his voice came back, lower this time, tighter. Is this how you're going to act now? I looked at the steam rising from my coffee. He wanted me to step into the old dance, defend myself, apologize, backtrack, offer a partial payment. Something that would let him stay in charge of the frame. I gave him none of that. I did not answer the question because the question itself was dishonest. He was asking about my attitude so he would not have to look at his own behavior. He was trying to move the conversation from what had happened to who I was becoming. And maybe that was the moment I understood something clearly. People who are used to your silence will call it cruelty the first time it stops serving them. I ended the call. Not abruptly. Not angrily. I just took the phone from my ear, tapped the screen, and set it down beside the coffee maker. The apartment went still again. Only this time it was a different kind of stillness than the one I had known before. Not that heavy, uncertain quiet that follows being wounded. This felt chosen, held in place by intention. I stood there a few seconds, then finally took a drink. The coffee was still hot. I noticed something then that surprised me a little. I was not drinking it to steady myself, not using it to fill a pause or soften a blow. I was just having coffee in my own kitchen, in my own home, with no one telling me what I owed them for the privilege of being called family. That did not feel triumphant. It felt clean. I carried the mug to the window and looked out at the street below. A delivery truck rolled past. Someone across the way was walking a dog in a rain jacket. Ordinary life, moving as if nothing had shifted. Maybe that was the strangest thing about all of it. A line gets crossed, and the world does not make a sound about it. The sun does not break through. Nobody knocks on your door and tells you that you were right to stop. You still have to go to work. Still answer emails. Still buy groceries. But under all that, something changes shape. By the time his birthday came around, I already knew how they were going to tell the story. My father's birthday fell on a Sunday that stayed dim from the moment I woke up. By early afternoon, the light outside had that flat winter look Tacoma gets, when the sky cannot decide whether to rain or just sit there and press down on everything. At my place, nothing moved unless I moved it. Same chair by the window, same coffee on the side table, same quiet hum from the refrigerator in the kitchen. At their house, I could picture the whole setup without trying. My mother would have the good serving dishes out. The dining table would be extended. My father would stand near the head of it, acting like he had not complained all week about the trouble of hosting. Jody would be dressed for effect, not comfort. Her boyfriend would be there too, smiling, shaking hands, fitting neatly into the version of the family they like to present. The only thing missing was me. I did not sit there feeling sorry for myself. That is not what it was. I just noticed the shape of the day without me in it, and for once I did not rush to fill in the missing piece. Around 2:30, my phone lit up, not with my mother's name, not my father's either. Scott, then one of my cousins, then another. People I barely heard from unless there was a birthday, a funeral, or somebody needed a casserole and a little public sympathy. I opened Scott's message first. Your mom's been crying all morning. Real nice, Kellen. The next one came before I had finished reading it. You really picked today to make some kind of point? Then another. Your dad worked his whole life for this family. You ought to be ashamed of yourself. I read each one all the way through, slowly. Not because they deserved that much attention, but because I wanted to see how cleanly the story had already been rewritten. No one asked what happened. No one asked what had been said to me. No one asked why a man who had shown up year after year had suddenly decided not to. They did not need facts. They already had a role for me, and it was one I had apparently been cast in long before I understood it myself. Difficult son, ungrateful son. The one who pulls away and makes things harder. One message from a cousin I had not seen in over a year read, "Some people don't know how to act when the attention isn't on them." That one almost impressed me. It was so far from the truth it had a kind of lazy confidence to it, the sort people use when they know they will never be challenged. Another came in from an aunt on my mother's side. Jody said, "You've been distant for a while. I guess this proves it." There it was. A version of me had already been passed around that house before the roast was even carved. They had done what families like mine often do best. They had taken the ugliest part of the truth, removed themselves from it completely, and handed the rest to other people as a finished story. Have you ever noticed how fast people believe something about you when it already matches what they were comfortable assuming? I set the phone face down on the table and let the room go still again. The messages kept arriving. I could hear the soft buzz against the wood every few seconds. Each one was a reminder that, back at that house, my absence was being explained in real time by people who had no interest in being honest. For years, that would have eaten at me. I would have wanted to respond, clarify, fix the misunderstanding, send one carefully worded message so at least somebody would know my side. That urge never came. Not because I was above it, because I was tired of defending myself to people who only seemed to remember I existed when they needed someone to blame. That felt new, strange but steady. I got up, walked to the window and looked down at the street. A woman in a red coat was loading grocery bags into the back of her SUV. Two kids on scooters cut across the sidewalk too fast for the slope. Across the parking lot, somebody was dragging a trash bin to the curb. Ordinary Sunday life, quiet, uninterested in the little courtroom my family had built without me. I went back to the table, picked up my coffee, and took a sip. It was still warm. A few days earlier, I would have swallowed it without noticing. Used it to soften the edge of whatever call had just come in. Something to hold while I talked myself into being reasonable. This time it felt like mine. Just a cup of coffee in my own hand, in my own apartment. No apology attached. No obligation folded into it. The phone buzzed again. I turned it over. Now it was my mother, calling. I watched it ring through and stop. Then my father's name flashed across the screen. Then Jody. 3 calls inside 10 minutes. Not messages now. Calls. That changed the temperature of the room immediately. People send messages when they want to perform. They call when something is slipping. I did not answer. Not yet. But I knew, as surely as I had known the shape of that dining room before the first text came in, that something at the house was no longer going according to plan. Then the first message came through, and everything started shutting down. I picked up the phone on the 3rd vibration, expecting another lecture from a cousin or one more wounded message from somebody who had decided I was the villain before hearing a single fact. It was my mother. Not a call this time. A text. The power just went out. The whole house is dark. Can you fix this? No greeting. No softness. No careful little opening line. Just urgency, plain and stripped down. Before I could even lock the screen, another message came in. No water. We can't use anything. Then a third. The internet's down. Guests are here. I stared at the messages without moving. They looked almost absurd sitting there in clean little bubbles, as if 3 basic systems shutting down in the middle of a birthday dinner were just another household inconvenience I was supposed to clear up before dessert. Then the calls started. Dad first, then Jody, then Mom again, back to back, no spacing between them, no pause long enough for the room around me to settle before the screen lit up again. My phone buzzed against the table so many times it began to feel less like a device and more like something alive, rattling with their panic. I did not answer. Not because I wanted them to suffer. That is the part people misunderstand when they have never been the one holding everything together in silence. They assume the first moment you stop rescuing people, you must be enjoying the fall. I was not. I just knew there was nothing left to discuss. Every conversation we could have had should have happened before this. Before my father told me I would embarrass the family. Before my mother called to ask for money like nothing had happened. Before they all decided my absence needed to be explained as selfishness instead of injury. Now they did not want a conversation. They wanted service restored. That difference mattered. I leaned back in the chair and watched the screen brighten, dim, and brighten again. I felt no rush in my chest, no urge to jump in, no satisfaction either. What I felt was stranger than that. Separation. Like I was finally seeing a machine I had been inside for years from the outside. Would you have picked up the phone, knowing exactly why they were calling? I did not need to be in that house to picture what was happening there. I knew every room too well. The dining room lights gone out all at once. Somebody near the hallway saying, "What just happened?" My father trying to make his voice sound calm, while the edge in it kept slipping through. My mother moving quickly from room to room, opening doors she did not need to open, as if motion alone might solve something. One of the guests trying to laugh it off. Somebody else checking their own phone, realizing the Wi-Fi was gone too. I could see Jody standing still for a second longer than everyone else. Watching. Not helping yet. Just taking inventory of the damage and trying to figure out how much of it would land on her polished version of the evening. And underneath all of that, the real thing. Confusion. Because this was not supposed to happen to them. Not on a birthday, not with guests in the house, not on a day built around image and good china and stories told in the right order. For years, I had been the person who made sure problems stayed invisible. Bills got paid before anyone noticed them. Accounts stayed current. Services stayed on. No one had to think about what it took because I had made consistency look natural. Now the problem was out in the open. Visible, awkward, impossible to dress up. And for the first time, I was not the quiet solution waiting in the background. The phone rang again. Dad. I let it run out. Then Mom. Then Jody. A text from Jody finally came through. "What are you doing? People are here." That one almost made me smile, though not from pleasure. Just from the honesty of it. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "Can we talk?" Just the one truth she actually cared about. People are here. Yes, that was the problem, wasn't it? The room around me stayed still. My apartment had not changed. The coffee on the table had cooled a little, but not gone cold. Outside, the light had started slipping toward evening, soft and colorless. Somewhere down the hall, a door shut. A dog barked once and went silent. I turned the phone over and set it face down. The buzzing dulled against the tabletop, then stopped. The quiet that returned felt controlled. Not empty, not lonely. Mine. A few seconds later, the screen lit again, casting a faint glow against the wood. I almost ignored it out of habit. Then I noticed it was not another call. It was video from Kathleen. I let it ring once, took one slow breath, and answered. I did not expect to see him there, and I definitely didn't expect what he said next. The screen opened to a shaky view of my parents' kitchen. The overhead light was off, so the room was lit unevenly by whatever daylight was still hanging on outside, and the weak yellow glow coming in from another room. I recognized the counters, the cabinets, the old ceramic bowl my mother kept by the sink. I could hear dishes being moved somewhere off camera, a chair dragged across the floor. Someone muttered under their breath. The confusion was still moving through the house like a draft. Kathleen held the phone a little too low at first, then adjusted it. Her face came into focus. She did not look angry. She did not look pleased either. Just thoughtful. Careful. Like she already knew more than she intended to say. "You're not going to fix it, are you?" she asked. She said it quietly, no judgment in it. No performance. Just a question. I looked at her for a moment before answering. "No," I said, "that was all." Kathleen studied me for another second, then gave one small nod. Not approval, not disappointment, understanding. That's simple. And somehow, in a day full of noise and blame and people deciding who I was without asking, that quiet little nod landed harder than any of it. Somebody saw what was actually happening, not the version being passed around the table, not the story shaped to protect my father's pride, the truth underneath it. Do you think one person truly understanding you can change everything? Because sometimes it can. The phone shifted slightly in Kathleen's hand, and more of the kitchen opened up behind her. I heard my father's voice before I saw him, tight, irritated, still trying to sound like the adult in the room, even while things kept slipping beyond his reach. My mother crossed in the background with a candle in one hand and a dish towel in the other, moving too fast for either of them to be useful. Jody was near the far end of the counter, arms folded, face set in that polished little expression she used when she wanted to look calm without actually helping. Then someone stepped into view from the side. Brian. He looked toward the screen casually at first, probably just trying to figure out who Kathleen was talking to. Then his eyes landed on me. I watched the exact moment recognition caught up with him. His posture changed before his face did. He straightened a little. Not dramatically, instinctively, like a man who had just seen his boss somewhere he never expected him to be. "Hey," he said, then stopped himself for half a beat. "Hey, boss." That word seemed to hit the room all at once. Not loudly, not with spectacle. It just dropped into the middle of everything they had been saying and split it clean down the middle. The kitchen behind him went still, instantly. My father stopped moving. My mother turned halfway around, candle still in her hand. Jody's expression did something I had not seen in years. It broke. No one there had been prepared for that title. Not the tone, not the familiarity in it, not what it implied. Brian looked from the screen back toward the others, suddenly aware that he had walked into something much bigger than a service outage and a birthday dinner gone sideways. He gave a small, uncertain smile and said, "I didn't realize you all knew Kellen from work." Nobody answered him. I did not smile. I did not rescue anyone from the silence. I just gave him a short nod. That was enough. Because the thing they had never cared enough to ask about had answered itself. My father, who had reduced my work to that tech thing. My mother, who had never once asked what my position actually was. Jody, who had apparently let her boyfriend walk into that house believing I was some vague, unimpressive relative who stayed out of the way. All of that collapsed without me needing to explain a single thing. Then my father spoke, and even his voice had changed. "You work with him?" Brian frowned slightly. "Yes, sir. He's one of the people who built the company." Built the company. Not works there. Not helps out. Not does something with computers. Built it. The silence that followed was different from the one after the lights went out. That had been confusion. This was exposure. I could almost feel the room adjusting around a new fact none of them wanted, but none of them could dismiss. I let it sit there. Then I said very calmly, "I hope the party's going well. No bitterness, no speech, just enough to let the truth stand on its own feet." And then I ended the call. The apartment was quiet again the second the screen went dark. No voices, no dishes. No frantic movement from the other side of town. Just my own place, my own breathing. The low hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I stayed where I was for a few seconds, phone still in my hand. I did not feel triumphant. That is important. I was not interested in humiliating them. What I felt was something simpler and in its own way, much bigger. Relief, the kind that comes when you stop trying to hold together a version of yourself that only exists to make other people comfortable. I got up, walked to the kitchen and poured another cup of coffee. Same mug, same counter, same apartment. I carried it back to the window and stood where I had stood at the beginning of all this. Outside, nothing had changed. The sky was still gray. The buildings were still there. A car moved through the lot below with its headlights on too early. I took a sip, warm, steady. "It's still quiet," I said to the empty room, "but now it feels like mine." I did not block their numbers. I did not write some grand final message. I did not disappear. I just stopped being the person who always made it easy for them to keep misunderstanding me. And somehow that changed everything. Do you think he was wrong? Or was that the only way he could finally be seen?